Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading from the One-Year Bible and examine some questions that extend our learning from the sermon on Sunday. Today I'm joined by Rivenbark and Alyssa Bream, and we're looking at a passage from Proverbs chapter 7, verses 6 through 23. And he says, "While I was at the window of my house looking through the curtain, I saw some naive young men, and one in particular who lacked common sense. He was crossing the street near the house of an immoral woman strolling down the path of her house. It was at twilight in the evening as deep darkness fell, and the woman approached him, seductively dressed and sly of heart. She was the brash, rebellious type, never content to stay at home. She is often in the streets and markets, soliciting at every corner. She threw her arms around him and kissed him. And with a brazen look, she said, 'I've just made my peace offerings and fulfilled my vows. You're the one I was looking for. I came out to find you. Here you are. My bed is spread with beautiful blankets with colored sheets of Egyptian linen. I've perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let's drink our fill of love until morning. Let's enjoy each other's caresses, for my husband is not home. He's away on a long trip. He has taken a wallet full of money with him and won't return until later this month.' So she seduced him with her pretty speech and enticed him with her flattery. He followed her at once like an ox going to the slaughter. He was like a stag in a trap, awaiting the arrow that would pierce his heart. He was like a bird flying into a snare, little knowing it would cost him his life." So this is a semi-risque kind of passage, and the actions of this woman are, bold, dangerous. When I read like this, a passage like this, it makes me wonder why the character of the young man is not described with the same degree of criticism. Jay?
We're dealing with relationships and communication, both of those. And this is a unique passage. And I think part of the answer to your question about why we tend to look at the woman differently than the man is she communicates in a lot of ways right here on the front end. And let me just make note of some of them. Says her house was well known. We typically would call that somebody living in the red light district. She had a reputation. And I find it interesting that even where she lived communicated something about relationships as related to her. It also says that she was seductively dressed, which communicates about relationships, whether good or bad. Says she frequently was in the streets and the markets working the corners, and even talks about her having her bed prepared for such an occasion, even though she's not directly called a prostitute outright. Here at the beginning of this passage, some people say that the word is more like an adulteress, and she claims to have a husband here.
Even acknowledges
it. Whether it's true or not, but she is communicating, and she is involved obviously in relationships, but on a different level and not necessarily such a good thing. It even talks about her making peace offerings and fulfilled her vows, and there's some speculation as to what all of that meant. But her communication about her relationship becomes very apparent. We would say she had a good sales pitch in her communication, and she was very specific in her target about relationships that she was looking for.
The young man here is an important role, and it says a lot about him too. He was kind of stupid. He was described as naive and lacked common sense, which I think in the Hebrew world probably is stronger than we would even like. That was a very bad thing to be in that culture. He was hanging around this house. We do not know if he maybe intentionally went there or if it was unintentional, but either way, he is just like rolling through life and not really paying attention except to this woman. We find in verse 22 and 23, he is like an ox going to slaughter. He is like a deer caught in a trap, just waiting to be shot through the heart. I don't. Is that a song? Sounds like maybe a song.
Apparently it is.
You gave love a bad name. Okay.
Straight to the heart, right? Ain't that the line? Okay.
Okay, all right. He's like a bird caught in a snare.
I hang around with enough center people who know a few songs.
I hang around with different center people that know newer songs. This is a very strong criticism of the man's character. He is just as responsible as the woman who seduced him. He didn't have to be there. He didn't have to be in that situation. And like you said, the passage highlights the importance of communication in relationships. And so which part of that passage is it the words that the woman is talking? Where's the communication here?
Mostly I'm referring, when I talk about this, to the fact that this scenario is part of a lesson, we mentioned yesterday, of a father teaching a son. So verse 1 and then 6 and 7, it's a father-son talk. And it seems to be a vivid illustration of what he's trying to tell his young man. And that's why I think it's important. It speaks to the importance of the communication in relationships. It's a vivid lesson that comes from a father-son talk. This isn't not intended to be a steamy scene from, some TV drama. It's intended to drive home the point that there was this father who cared about his son and was trying to keep him from being that naive, ignorant, stupid, young man. And I think there's some things we can take away from this passage, right? So when communicating important lessons, using good stories, good descriptions that make it less forgettable. I don't think we could argue that this man would have forgotten this talk. It was pretty much laid out for him, right? And we shouldn't just warn, we should give wisdom. Like, if effective communication doesn't just point out risk, it equips other people to make wise choices. And I think we also have to communicate with some care and some concern. When this story is placed in the context of a father-son talk, right? If you read it that way, changes the whole tone of how you're reading it, right? And so I think communication has to be rooted in love, so the listener is more receptive. One of the things that I think I've got better at it, and I know I'm better at it today. But I wanted to improve on the way my dad, I picked up a lot of things from my dad that were very helpful and beneficial and wise, but sitting down and having a one-on-one instructive conversation, these are the things, you could be, I can never imagine my dad having a prostitute or an adulterous conversation. Mm-hmm. And in hindsight, I think it could have been helpful, right? Whether he had, he could warn me about how things came about, because that's what he's doing here. That's what this father's doing. The two things, there are two things I would say. One, I was, as we've read this text, and I've been sitting here thinking on this podcast how old I would have been. I'm not 100% sure, but I would guess in the 23, 24-year-old range. That's what I would guess. And I was selling restaurant equipment, and I had sold some equipment to a guy in Columbia, South Carolina. I'd gone to see him, to take it to him. So this was pre-cell phones. So I would guess I was closer to 23 because I had my first cell phone in that 26-year-old range. So I was probably 23, 24 years old. And his warehouse was off of a main drag in town, set back off the road behind a strip motel that was in a V form, right? If you've traveled, you've probably seen these single level motels as in a V form, and the place was out at the end. So anyway, he's not there. I'm pretty sure I have a pager at this point, and I know he has a pager. So I go to a payphone, the closest payphone was in the parking lot of this motel. So I walked out down the path where his warehouse was, out to the sidewalk, looked for a payphone, and I could see one right there in front of that motel. And so I went over there and I dialed the 800 number, which would have been free. And, I had to put the payphone number in his pager so he could call me back. And so I'm over there doing that. And as soon as I show up at that payphone, every door in that motel opens. And there were prostitutes in every room, and they come out and they're whistling and catcalling. Hey, I got you right here. And I had never seen anything like that. I had lived a pretty sheltered life. But what are you laughing? I had
choices and choices and choices.
I had never seen anything like that. But here's the thing, right? That was easy. That was an easy no. That was so far removed from where I was and what was reality. That was an easy no. I don't think I needed to have some big conversation, to say no to a prostitute in that form. But later in my life, I would struggle in keeping my commitment in my marriage, but it had nothing to do with, a prostitute or a seductive dressed person. It had everything to do with the danger of conversation and relationship and where there should be some barriers and walls. And those are conversations that I have tried to have with my kids, sometimes to no avail, right? Sometimes it hasn't been useful, but I have tried to be very vulnerable and open to them, right? I don't think the greatest danger is a woman in the street, who says, hey, I've perfumed up my bed, come hang out with me. I don't think that is the danger. The danger is you let down your guard in relationships. And those are the things I wish I had more conversations about when I was younger. It would have headed off some trouble. And I think as parents and as believers, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, you talked about vulnerability. I think sometimes the greatest value we can have with people is saying, right, this is what you need to watch out for. This is when you need to be able to say no. This is when you need to be able to walk away. And so how do you think this passage guides you or helps you in communicating with your children or other family members?
Well, for me, the most teachable moments are in the moment. When you see something, you hear something, you're experiencing something simultaneously. And I try to do that with my children. I try to do it with my grandchildren, rather than ignoring it or pretend it's not there, because they're seeing it, they're hearing it, they're around it. Is to just address it, just jump in and say, hey, what are your thoughts about that? What are you picking up from that? Because I think the real life scenarios are the ones that they're going to remember the most. And surprisingly enough for me, with my children and grandchildren, I don't find those times very difficult to initiate those conversations. And I think a lot of that came from, I grew up in a home that was a wonderful Christian home, extremely sheltered, where those types of conversations just didn't take place. And so picking up and learning from that, I was like, I want to be intentional to make sure we do have conversations, ask difficult questions, and allow them a place to learn and have input about those things.
I think beyond that, you have to communicate before it becomes a problem for your children. It's once they've made those decisions, sometimes there are things you can't undo, but you have to start to lay the groundwork. Like the conversations that I have with my kids are going to be way different because of their age, but there are conversations I do have that are like, hey, if you don't want to hug somebody, it's okay. And I think that sets boundaries and good things that you can talk about as you go on. So I think that you have to start to set those, have the little bit hard conversations, maybe when they're even just a little bit too young. Because I was talking to one of my son's friends, and my son is in 4th grade, and this friend was like, yeah, my girlfriend, da, da, da. I'm like, you are in 4th grade. But I didn't say that to him, but like,
You were thinking it.
yeah. You got to have these conversations before you think they're going to become a problem, because once it's a problem, then you got to do some
and we live
more
in
work.
a culture today where they're going to find it out. They're going to be exposed to it.
Information's available.
Right. You can't. I saw a principal. This is semi off topic. They had just had their first encounter with a set of meta glasses in class. So they're smart glasses with cameras on them. And the kid is taking his test, and the answers are showing up on his screen, and the teacher has no idea. I gotta say,
that's pretty smart.
Wow.
Yeah. And
to be an early adapter, right?
Right. And so that was the first time. But that's the challenge of education now. It used to be you were the one that gave them the information. Mm-hmm. If you don't start really, really early, you're not the one giving them the information. TikTok is, Instagram is. Or some other kid who has it, right? It's like, well, we think things like, well, I'm going to keep my kids from it. They're not going to have a phone. They're not. If their friend has it, Judah's friend has a girlfriend, right? Mm-hmm. He's going to know. He's going to hear things and experience things. I think being able to sit down and do it in a way with wisdom, understanding, and compassion is extremely important. So, Alyssa, I'm going to let you answer this question first. Do you think the average American person would dismiss this text as being misogynistic? If so, what does it say about our culture?
I don't think that this passage is particularly misogynistic. I think there are lots of times we can talk about misogyny and other things, and this one it's a very real situation that happens. Out of the three of us, one of us has been solicited by prostitutes, apparently.
I'm just the only one willing to talk about it.
At a payphone. With a pager.
So I don't find this particularly oh my goodness, they're displaying women this way. I think both the man and the woman bear the responsibility here of the situation that's going on. We talked about that this man was pretty stupid to be in that situation, and he could have walked away at any moment. It wasn't like she had him handcuffed and was leading him away. He was there on his own free will.
No, I would agree with it. I think the story is the story, and you see two different perspectives, and there's lessons to be learned from both.
Yeah, well, I think we do get a little bit uptight. I saw a post just this past week. They said, it was talking about the Bible being misogynistic, and it started. The post was about Adam and Eve, and that it put all the blame on Eve. That's not how I read the story, right? That's not how I read the story. However, it's also ignorant to ignore the tendencies of people, right? And so whether we like it or not, and I know it's somewhat stereotypical, whether we like it or not, there's a reason why they call prostitution the oldest profession, because it plays into tendencies. Stupid, naive men who think, okay, this isn't going to harm anybody, and women who are shrewd and understand that that was a way, especially in a time when they may not have been able to get an advantage, right? To get a, I almost said get a leg up.
You almost did.
Terrible.
You almost said it, and then you did say
it. To get ahead, right, in a situation, and it's sometimes, but right, we even find. I mean, you can find. Is it Judah's daughter-in-law, Tamar? Is her name Tamar?
Yeah.
Who dresses up as a prostitute to solicit her own father-in-law so she can have a child.
And she was the righteous one in that situation.
Exactly, right? Because he wasn't doing what he hadn't fulfilled what he said he was going to fulfill. But the reason why she did it is she played into what are ingrained, needs that we recognize, and you see that, and I think it's just dangerous when we try to contextualize things in a bad way. Anyway, there are two people that never say a word: the Son and the Father. And like we don't. The son who's listening, to his father, and then the naive young man in the illustration we don't hear any responses from them. They neither one say anything. Is there an observation to make about that? Is there something we can learn? Would you have liked to have heard from them?
To me, I think the father is playing to the personality type of the son, because he at least in this story, he remains silent. The guy he's talking about remains silent. I think there's some correlation there. I think he's framing it, and I'm giving him a lot of credit. I think he's framing it to the point so that the son could actually put himself in that situation and realize that could easily be me. Young and naive.
I think if we were actually watching this play and there was silence, that there's two lessons I would take. You have to listen to the right people. One person was listening to a very wise person. One person was not. And silence isn't always golden if you're listening to the wrong person.
Mm-hmm.
One two-letter word would have stopped that conversation with the prostitute, no, and kept walking. But if you're listening to somebody who is wise, just to let them talk and to listen and to take that into account, even if maybe you don't agree with everything that they're going to say, just let them talk and take that into consideration in your life.
I wonder if the father knew his son had been down to this street, right? He knew he had been possibly hanging around, and the no response from the son is a, gosh, how did you know?
Is a clear indication.
Have your parents ever said anything?
My number.
Have your parents ever said anything to you and you go, how did they know? Right? How did they find out? I remember when Austin was little, he used to think he literally pulled his mom's hair apart, thinking she had eyes in the back of her head, because she could see things he didn't understand why she could see. And I think that when he's silent, that's what I think. I think his dad's got his number. I think he's warning him. Maybe he hasn't fallen prey yet, but maybe he's gone down with some of his friends. Maybe he's been hanging around in the wrong places, and his dad's trying to offer him a warning before he
very possible
makes a mistake. So, well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue a conversation around our daily Bible reading from the One Year Bible.